Hey, Inspired Women! The Inspired podcast is designed to have relevant conversations centered around our everyday lives, looking through the lens of the Word of God. Life can be hard to navigate, especially as a Jesus-believing sister, mom, friend, single, or wife. We invite you and welcome you to our table and hope that you're inspired to view God in bigger and more awe-inspiring ways as you walk this journey with Him.
Hello and welcome back to the Inspired podcast. I'm so excited to be with you guys here today. We are on our last episode, so as sad as that is, I think we've talked about so many great topics over the past season. It's been so good, but before we jump in, I just want to say we have the Inspired Conference coming up in a month. So I think it's exactly a month from today, Inspire Conference on April 27th, which I'm super excited about. I'm here with Jessica and Hope.
Hey.
I don't know about y'all. I don't know, Jessica, are you excited for the conference? I can't tell.
Just a little.
Just a little.
Just a little. I mean, like, this is our fourth conference. Jeez.
I know.
That's going to be amazing.
Crazy.
And I mean, like, it gets better every year.
Yeah.
Every
really
year.
so
I
good.
mean, like, all of us have been, like, in the trenches with planning
Yeah.
and brainstorming and dreaming and praying for the conference. And,
Yeah.
like, to start to see some of it start to come to life
It's-
is very
It's
exciting.
amazing.
Yeah. A
it's
month
so cool.
out is like the coolest spot because
Yeah.
it's like you still have the excitement, but you're like, oh, there's some stuff coming together. It's so
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. My like love and passion is decor.
Yeah.
Yes, girl.
And so we've
We
been
do
putting
that.
all the things together to make the foyer and outside and the auditorium so special and fun. All the photo ops, of course.
Well,
Yes.
duh.
We love a good photo op, so we're really excited.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. I can't wait. I've been able to go to there was one that I didn't go to, which I was like had serious FOMO and was so sad. So I made sure I made it to the past.
That's pretty much what we're trying to do right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're trying to give you FOMO, but seriously, if you're sitting here listening and maybe you've been listening to the podcast or maybe it's your first time and you're like, I don't even know what the Inspired Conference is. It's just a time for women to come together and to hear from some amazing speakers, to join in worship, to have times of community and meeting new people. It's just such a powerful day for us all to come together. So if you've been on the edge, not sure whether you should sign up, this is my encouragement to tell you today
Yeah.
to sign up for the Inspired podcast or the Inspired Conference. I call it the podcast.
Yeah.
If you want to sign up
Well,
for
this
the
is
podcast
that.
too,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's what we're on. But there's actually a pre-registration option this year.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, you can register and then I think you pay
You pay, like,
Like a
you
s-
put your card in and it doesn't charge you anything right now. And then it gives you a little bit to save, a little bit
Yeah.
of time. Like, if we're 1 month away, sign up today. And then like a week before, you'll get an email that says, hey, your card's going to run. So it kind of gives you a little time to save.
So it's like you can secure your spot,
Yes,
but
you can
like
secure
you're
your
not on
spot,
the line for
but
the
you're
whole
not.
price right then, which
Yes.
I don't know about y'all, but for me being young and saving for a wedding, that gives me a lot more flexibility
Yes.
to
Yeah.
like make sure, I have time and
Yeah.
maybe even be like, hey, like someone want to give me an Easter gift
Yeah,
or,
Easter,
if you have a
birthday,
birthday,
yeah.
like it just
Yeah.
gives you
give
more
me
flexibility.
an early birthday gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that way, like that's not something that stops you from registering. So
Yeah.
that-
And we all have a code. And so if you're
Yes.
listening, this is kind of an Easter egg.
Yeah.
it's
And
a special drop.
it is, yeah. So we have a 10% code off for you.
Mhm.
And if you email inspiredatthex.church, we'll get back to you with a code that you can register for. So
Yeah.
you can do the code on top of the pre-register and you're set.
And you're really saving.
Yeah.
It's
So-
kind of like girl math.
Oh,
Girl
yeah.
math. Oh
It's
my
girl
gosh.
math.
I'm not paying for it right now, then
So I'll
technically
register.
It's
Yeah.
like it's fine, and like you have time.
Exactly.
And then if you set aside a little bit every paycheck, then it's
Yeah.
like I basically got it for free.
Exactly.
So
girl math.
if you do girl math like me, then
Yeah.
I get stuck with those like pay in 4, and then I'm like,
Oh.
basically I'm only paying $20 for this, but then when it comes out every 2 weeks, I'm like,
You're like, oh,
but
Shoot.
this is different. This is investing into your spiritual journey. It's gonna be such a good day.
Yeah,
so.
it's gonna be great. The speakers are awesome. We have a theme that we're going along. I mean, we've been doing the worship sets, playing the
Yes.
worship sets.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, it's gonna
worship.
be so good.
I'm so excited.
Okay, I will confess, I'm not I'm not a super girly girl that's like,
Yeah.
I just want to worship with my
Mhm.
sisters.
Yeah.
But God has expanded my view year after year, that I'm sitting out in the seats during the conference and I'm like bawling or crying because I'm like, I was wrong. And God shows up every year and is like, these are the women that I have for you in this season to do life with and to support you when it's hard and to remind you to keep going and to look to him and everything. And so there's just something powerful. Things come full circle that, like when we do conference. And I will say this too, is that it's not just a day to come and hang out with girls. It's really like the way that we plan this and the way we pray for it is so intentional that we have a theme. There's a verse that we're praying that would just land in the hearts of the women that come. We're praying for you to build community. We're praying that God would bring you to a place of gratitude, that during worship and during the day, you're able to see his faithfulness the whole year before. And then also the day is really just to tee you up into whatever God is calling you into next. And so it's not just a day to like get rid of your kids or to clear your schedule to like get a bunch of cool Instagram photos. It really, so much of what we do is intentional, and there's a big reason that we have behind the reason why we have what we do. So
we've been saying that it's a day of really calling women into true discipleship.
Yes,
it's not just a fun day where you plan a cool outfit and you look cute.
There's
and
a lot of fun colors.
You worship and you cry your eyeballs out, because we're gonna do that. There is something powerful, I will say. There's something powerful about a room full of women worshiping. I don't know what it is.
I know. It's and you like hear the voices and you're like,
it's beautiful.
I don't know if it's the pressure that's removed, because there's no guys in the room. I don't know what it is.
Well, sometimes when I worship, I'm like, if I'm not an emotional person, I'm like the added stress of like, I'm just afraid a guy's gonna look at me and be like, oh my gosh, here we go. She's crying about Jesus again.
No, it is. It's so powerful. So that, but also just like really a deep dive into discipleship and really walking with the Lord, because that's what we're all called to. So I'm excited. It's gonna be a powerful day. It's gonna be a fun day as well, but powerful nonetheless.
It's gonna be so good. So if you were walking in with any hesitations, hopefully this eased some of them and you're super excited. So just go register. It's gonna be such a great thing. And I don't want any of you to feel like I did the first year, feeling super FOMO. Not that, but it's just gonna be something that's so good for your spiritual journey, like Hope said, and your discipleship. So it's gonna be so great. I'm so excited.
Can't wait.
I feel like that kind of leads us into what we're talking about today, because I think sharing the heart behind what we do for Inspired, it's not just, for the girlies. And yes, it is. That is true, but that's not all. I think the heart behind everything that we do is to minister to other people and to tell them about Jesus, to further their relationship with Jesus and walk alongside them with it in that.
Well, if we're honest, so much, and for me, maybe not for you guys, but I'm guessing it is for you guys, that there's a part of this that has come from a personal experience that you have had with God. Like that you've experienced God's presence in such a way that you're like, nobody can miss out on this.
Like, I want you to.
Which is the fuel behind not only Inspired, but a lot of what us three at this table sit around and we do just on a daily basis, whether that's something that we get paid for or not. I mean, like so much of my Christian walk is fueled by I know the ins and outs of being loved, and I'm still learning, but I have experienced God in such a powerful way that nobody can miss out on this.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, and it was kind of in a room full of women that I feel like the spark ignited for me. Like, okay, wow, God's moving in this room, and I know that he wants to move in so many other rooms and so many other lives. And so allowing me to be a part of something like Inspired and the conference and all the things is really, like you said, it's born out of, okay, God changed my life in this kind of environment. Now, how can I be a part of someone else's life being changed? That's so good.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's in a lot of the things that I feel called to do in the ministry world. It's either, yes, this was something for me that changed my life, and I absolutely want to create that space and that availability for other people, or this is something that I needed. Like when I served with like youth, like in high school, I'm like, I wish that I had someone when I was this age who poured into me and who loved me and who taught me about the Word, and I didn't have it. So I want to be that for other people. So whether or not, you know, you had these things, or you had that moment, or maybe it came later in life, but you want to be that for someone else. I think that's like, those are the two things that like really, it's like we have a pull to this, and it's not because like, oh, it's so fun and we want to do this big conference, but because we've had our life changed by what Jesus has done for us in the spaces that happened in, and we want to create that for other people. So we're really just going to dive into like ministry and like Inspired as a ministry, but also there's people in it who enact ministry, and a lot of them don't do it as a job. It's something that they do out of their heart. None of us do it
as a job. That's
true.
The very unique thing about Inspired that I love. As of right now, nobody does this for a job. Nobody gets paid for Inspired. And so I think that's really unique. I think that really speaks to the movement that God is doing in a lot of our women. Because there are how many girls are on the Inspired team? Like 14.
I think 13 or 14.
And some of them are on staff and work in different capacities. And then the other part of us are just like, hey, like I believe in this and God's changed me and I want to be a part in some small way for other people to encounter the person who changed my life. And so I think that is the really great thing about Inspired. And
it's cool.
I just think that's
I love it
special.
It's not obligation or compulsion. Not that people who work in ministry that it is that, but we know that like the intentions behind everyone is that they care and that they're here because they want to do it out of their heart and out of their passion, and not because it's their job. So that's something beautiful. I think like as we dive into this, and I'm gonna pull Lydia because she loves to look up definitions, because I was like I'm sitting here, like people ask, like I would say that I work in ministry, and then someone was like, what does that mean?
It's a really churchy word.
First of all, it can mean so many different things, but like depending on if you're talking vocational or like just the ministry that we all have as Christians. So I looked up the definition. Ministry basically means to minister. So what does minister mean? I love this one. It says to attend to the needs of someone. So in my head, that means to attend to the spiritual needs of others. And like number one, if you see someone who doesn't know Jesus, their number one spiritual need is to hear the gospel. And we're all called to do that. And then like to attend to them as they grow in their faith. So to be like a spiritual provider, because provider was another thing for minister. I don't mean like the source. Obviously the source is God, the source is Jesus and his word, but to be like almost like someone who walks along with that with other people. And so like that definition definitely, like honest, I don't know if it surprised me, but it's so much more simple than what I imagined it to be.
Well, I even like the first part of it, attend to the needs of someone, because if we're honest, and if we look back on the life of Jesus, he met people's physical needs before he met their spiritual needs. And so many times the people that he healed and the people that he was meeting their needs, they didn't even know they had a spiritual need. And so I think that the basis of ministry starts from meeting people's needs.
That's
and
so cool.
Us knowing because we've experienced God's presence that everybody needs that. In order to thrive and to like live life to the full, they need the presence of Jesus. And so what better way to do that by serving someone's base physical need first?
That's powerful.
No, that's so good.
I know, like you said, kind of at the beginning, ministry, when you say, oh, I'm in ministry, people are like, okay, so.
I know, but like think
like,
about
what's your job description?
Telling someone that you're sitting next to on a plane.
Right. Okay, that's when it always happened to me. Like I used to do ministry in Nashville, and so I was traveling a ton, and literally it was like, what are you traveling for? And you kind of have this weird like, oh, what do I tell them? Because you know you're gonna have to explain it. And I'm not scared to tell anyone. Honestly, it's like I know that's what I'm called to do, but sometimes
but I will
tricky.
say, like, sometimes it's a turnoff for people. Like if you tell people you work in a church, they're gonna be like, oh,
like, okay.
Especially if they've had a bad experience or if they don't know Jesus and walk with him. It's like, oh, okay, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? And I'm always like, all right, I work in ministry. I'm traveling for ministry. And it's like, you know that you're going to have to explain it. In their minds, they either think you work for a huge church and that's a turnoff, or you're like a missionary and you live in Haiti.
You want to evangelize to them right now.
And I'm like, no, I do not live in Haiti. I have never, and I probably will never unless God calls me to that.
I'd like
pray
to
for
see
my
that
heart.
happen.
So yeah, but it's just hard to like explain it to
it's
someone
very hard to explain
that isn't in church or hasn't been around ministry. But I think boiling the definition down almost helps me. And I'm not working in vocational ministry anymore, and we'll talk about that later. God's completely.
Could you imagine if what you said was, I just meet people's needs?
Right.
That could mean a lot of different things.
Strange.
That'd be a little different. Like,
that would be strange. But it helps me to think like, wow, what could that look like? You know, what could it look like in my everyday life? If I thought through me being called to ministry, and like I said, I'm not in vocational ministry anymore, but my everyday, I believe that every single day, if we're walking with Jesus, we're called to minister to people. If I thought of that every single day, like, hey, my one goal today is to meet people's needs.
Oh my gosh.
Like, how powerful if if all of us as Christians said, hey, today I'm going to meet people's needs. Anyone that I saw, the person in front of me that their card got declined when I went and got coffee, if I just slipped my card up and said, hey, I got you today, what would that do? Like, that's crazy
I
to think
that
about.
some of this is hard to live out in actual reality because people are not used to outrageous generosity. And even if it's not like with financial means, like people are just not used to like being like people being kind
or cared for
cared for
at all.
Well, we talked a whole episode about receiving and how hard it is to like to receive from God and from other people. I mean, like you're right, and I would venture out to say that it's even difficult to explain what you do when people do work in the church. Like maybe not like your church, because people understand, but like people that are just like, or at least associated with the church. I won't say like, because sometimes like there's the people that walk into a church run the whole gamut of like different backgrounds, different lifestyles, different callings, so many different things. And when you say like, I minister to people, then that just, because that doesn't, what does that even mean?
Yeah. It's like, how does that, like, how is that a job? Like,
that's a big thing. People are like, think like, what do you do during the week? If like, if
That's
Sunday
so
is like the day that you work, what do you do during the week?
When I worked on staff here, my boyfriend has a 16-year-old and 13-year-old. And when we first started dating, they asked him, so Hope works at the church, but like she's there every day. What does she do?
Like, it's not
like
just Sundays?
It doesn't make sense. But I don't think a 13 and 16-year-old are the only ones asking that question.
Sure.
Like everyone is probably asking the question, what happens? Like you have that much to do that you're there
like
40
hours.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue. Like, before we talk about kind of as a whole, like what ministry means for Christians and Christ followers and maybe people who are called to vocational ministry, we can talk about that a little bit, but maybe talk about your personal experience, like, you know, how you see ministry in your life, whether it's been as a job, whether it's not been as a job, how like you've walked that out. Because I know we all have very unique but also similar perspectives. Because we do similar things, but we do them in completely different ways. So I just think it'd be cool to hear just like your personal journey with that.
Yeah. I'll say for me, ministry was never something I would do in my mind. Like, I never thought that would be something that I would do. I did not grow up in the church at all. I came to know Jesus at the age of 16, all on my own, actually in this church, which is so crazy. And I started attending church all by myself. Like, literally, I can remember driving myself to the church. I can remember walking in, serving on a team, leading a team. Like, now looking back, I'm like, God had ministry all over my life. But at the time, like, I didn't feel qualified. I didn't feel like that was something that I could do. So for me to sit in ministry for 7 years of my adult life was crazy. Like, I could not believe it. But he led me to starting a women's ministry on my college campus, to then working on staff for that ministry for years, to then moving back to my hometown to work at the church that it all started in. And so looking back, I'm like, yeah, it all makes sense, right? And that's kind of what I think we all probably say. But at the start, I never thought that, like, okay, yep, this is what my life's going to look like. I'm going to work in ministry and at a church. And so for me, I think, you know, looking back now as I'm not in vocational ministry, it's crazy because I feel like God equipped me every step of the way. Like, he put so many tools in my tool belt in order to do it that it didn't have to fall on me to do. It was all because of him. And so there are challenges that come with that. There are a lot of, to be honest, like, because I didn't grow up in church, it was really hard to explain to my family that I was going to go into ministry. I was preached at my whole entire life, do something that makes a lot of money. And so here I am, my very first job, guys, my very first job out of college was actually a support raised position. And if you don't know what that means, it means I didn't get paid a salary. I fundraised my salary. So my very first job out of college that I just spent so much money on was to go ask people for money so that I could live for the next year. That was crazy. And did God provide? Abundantly, like more than I could have imagined. But the thought of that was crazy, to go to my family and say, hey, I'm going into ministry and this is what it looks like. So I think, you know.
Yeah, because not only are you not making money, you're asking other people for money.
Right.
They were probably like, oh my God.
And I'm asking them for money. Like, I'm asking my family. So it looked very
They're probably
different.
like, what difference is this from your allowance that you got when you lived here?
Literally. They're like, why don't we just support you? Like,
move back home.
Yeah, exactly. So it looked very different than what I could have even wrote for my life. But I learned so much. And, you know, like you said, there's so much to learn when you're not in it too. But it was such a sweet journey getting to where I am now. It's crazy to think back.
Where do you feel like you are now in terms of like what ministry means to you in your everyday life? Yeah.
So like I said, I was on staff here at X Church. I felt like God was leading me into I don't like to say the secular world, but the business world. Let's say business world. And it's crazy because honestly, I was just telling someone out in the foyer, like right before this, it's crazy how when you say yes to God, what he does, even if it feels so strange, like feeling like I needed to go into the business world was really hard, if I'm being honest, because, and I think I talked about it a couple episodes ago, but it was really hard because it felt like I was almost throwing away a calling or an anointing. And so, because it feels weird, like, oh, I'm going to step off of staff and not be in vocational ministry. That seems backwards. But I really felt like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And God has opened so many doors. And it's only been a couple months. Like, he's opened so many doors. And I believe it was because of my yes. And so I think ministry for me right now is in the little mundane conversations. I really do. Like, ministry in college, ministry after college, and ministry here on staff looked really different. It was a lot of bigger moments and, you know, events. I was in the events world and it was all of that. But I think now it's the conversation that I have with my coworker and just showing them love when they didn't meet a deadline. Or just sharing with them, this is what I've been up to. I think those are the ministry moments for me. I had a call the other day with this woman, she's chairing an event that I'm planning, and she does not know the Lord. It is very obvious. She is very spiritual, though, if that makes sense. And so I was able to pour into her. And I didn't mention Jesus' name at all, but I know for a fact that she felt love that she's probably not felt in a really long time. She's going through a divorce, and life is really tough for her right now. And I just felt prompted by the Holy Spirit to just encourage her in the walk that she's in. And seriously, I know that it made a difference, not because of anything I said, but because the Holy Spirit deposited encouraging words into me for her. But I think it just looks like that. Honestly, it's in my conversations.
Can we even add to the definition of like to minister to someone means to see someone whole? And
truthfully, that's what I feel like my call is right now.
Seeing just someone as as an image bearer of God, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
Exactly, because they're all created by him. So
and then treating them like that.
Yeah, I feel like that's simply put, that's what it is right now for me. That's all it is the conversations, the simple conversations.
I love that. I love your perspective. That's so good.
I would also say what you say about ministry being in the mundane and everyday, because if if we're going based on the definition of like ministry, I've been doing ministry for over 20 years. Right. And that doesn't mean that I've gotten paid to do it for 20 years. But I've been attached to some form of ministry for, years. 2 decades.
Yeah.
And it started out of in high school, I was like, my claim to fame is I never had to get a job in high school. Like I was like, I guess I was like a spoiled brat, but I did so many extracurricular activities. I was in like band and Girl Scouts and I did soccer throughout high school. And that just took up all my time. And my parents were so gracious to say like, you don't have to get a job, like wait until, you go to college or whatever. And I went off to college, still didn't have a job. And then when I came back from college after going away for 1 year, and then my parents were like, okay, now you have to get a job. I didn't even live at home. Like I lived on my own, like with some other girls. And so then I got a job, and my first job was like an administrative assistant at a church.
Wow.
And I would call that ministry because I was answering phones and sending out letters and making copies and basically just assisting all the other ministers to what they needed to do every week. What made them run like a well-oiled machine. I loved being behind the scenes, just like, what do you need? How can I help? Yeah. And I knew that at that point that this is serving a something greater than me. People are coming to know Jesus because I made a copy to send out in the mailer to where they came to church and then ended up experiencing who Jesus was. That's the thought process you have to have when you want to think in terms of ministry. And so I did that for a little while, and until I had my firstborn. And then I went very part-time, and I taught myself graphic design. And then I worked still at that church, but very part-time doing graphic design. And I would still call that ministry. I mean, like this church out of any other is just hits graphics out of the park. I mean, like what you see, what you feel, what you hear, and what you experience when you walk in these doors, all are coming out of a branding. And that is deep ministry as well. And so I did that, and then I had another kid and went even more part-time than that. Then we picked up our family and moved to Ohio, and I will say that was a little bit of like, I felt like a fish out of water, not only because I was in a different state away from family, but because that was the first time in a good 5 years that I didn't have a job. And I really struggled with finding my purpose and not having a job or a title. I don't think it so much was the money as the title for me. And that probably has a lot to do with my personality. But I just didn't have a title, so I didn't feel like what I was doing was very valid or what I was doing wasn't important. And I do remember just one time having the thought of, I am still doing ministry, but I'm ministering to my kids. That is so significant and so important. And I still had my feet into the church world, because Trey, he has worked in a church for 20 years. And so I have been connected in that way to where, and let me say this too, if you have a spouse or a loved one that's in ministry, you are still part of that, because you're supporting them and you're praying for them on their behalf, and you're pouring into them. You're creating a space for them to be safe and heard. It's so important. So don't ever undervalue what it means to have a loved one or someone close to you or a spouse or whatever going through ministry, going in ministry and being a part of ministry, because you're carrying that burden with them. But I mean, some way or fashion, I was involved with serving or leading something or meeting one-on-one with women, having them in my home. I mean, even opening my home like to hospitality, like for a lot of Trey's employees or peers that he was working with, like that's also ministry. And so there's just so many, it looks so different over the years, but to be meeting the needs of people has just been a common thread for a long time in my life. And like right now I'm like, I still don't have a title. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And sometimes, and I've shared this before, but like I struggle when people are like, what do you do? I'm like,
it's like, it's more than,
I don't know if you'd really understand. Like, so what ends up coming out of my mouth is like, well, I'm a stay-at-home mom and I like to like be up at the church and help and volunteer. And that, I guess that's like what comes across, but like, so it's interesting because, I just think that there's so many more ways that you can classify ministry than what you probably initially think about.
That's what I was even thinking when you were talking. It's like, okay, you saying opening up your home, that's meeting a need for someone.
Yes.
You saying helping and volunteering and serving at the church, meeting needs. You being an admin assistant, you were meeting the needs of the people that were also meeting the needs. Like, I love that we can come back to this definition, because seriously, if we look, and you know, it's so cliche to be like, every day your every day is your minute or your ministry, or your, you know, your ministry is your life or whatever. It's cliche to say that, but wow,
it's
is that
so
true?
Important.
Wow, is that true?
I feel like sometimes in the modern church we glamorize like the platform. And I'm not saying that like that's across the board, but I see this on social media a lot, is that we make the platform seem like that's the end.
The end goal.
And like that's like where you're headed, and that's like the goal and what you need to aim for. And that just could not be any more false, because yes, it is one avenue, but it is not the avenue. And I have had to fight, like literal tears and prayers fight for God to tell me what I'm doing is so meaningful and purposeful, even if that means that I'm just meeting the needs of my kids that day, and or I'm saying no to this and this so that I can protect that time with them, to where I'm having intentional conversations and like physical touch with them and meeting their needs in different ways, like laundry, clean house, dinner on the table. I mean, things like that are meeting their needs. And so there's a balance. There's so much of a balance in like the ordinary and mundane. And like the goal is not always get ahead, achieve more, do more, be more, get more followers, get more likes. That is just not it's not the end goal.
And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about the role of women and confidence throughout this season. If you haven't listened, go listen to all those episodes. But we've talked a lot about it, but I think knowing your lane in ministry is really important. Whether you are on staff at a church, whether you're on staff at a women's ministry like I was, you have to know your lane. Whether you're a stay-at-home mom or in the business world, you have to know your lane. You have to know what God has called you to. Because if I'm not careful, I'm going to compare. I'm going to compare my ministry to what you're doing, Jessica, as a stay-at-home mom.
Absolutely. And that's a trap.
It's a trap. And you think that, oh, well, my ministry isn't as powerful, or what I'm doing every single day to minister to people isn't as powerful as the person who is up on the platform, or isn't as powerful as the person leading a small group or a circle.
Or as an influencer on Instagram.
Whatever that may be, whatever you fall into. But that's why it's so important to know, okay, what is the ministry that God has called me to? So if you're listening and you're like, well, I'm not a stay-at-home mom, I can't do that. Or I'm not in the business world, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I can't do that. Or I'm not on staff at a church. That's okay. You don't have to be any of those things. What are you? Are you a CEO? Are you an entrepreneur? Do you own a small business? What are you, and what has God called you to be a minister in?
That's so good. That's so good. Yeah, I feel like with my journey, it was a lot of like, I was similar to both of you guys. I feel like Hope, I was like, I didn't know. First of all, I didn't even know that ministry was a thing that you can do as a job. To me, it was like the pastor gets paid, everyone else volunteers.
Right.
That's the churches I grew up in.
Yeah.
So like
Well,
I didn't.
It's true for a lot of churches.
Like when
Yeah.
I remember someone told me like, yeah, we're here Monday through Thursday. I was like, huh? Like what?
You are.
You get paid to do that? So
Yeah.
it was never like in my scope. It wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna go to school for this. And I feel like it was just kind of like I read something recently about like callings into ministry or whatever, and there was one that's called like an open door calling, or like, or what is it called? The church. I can't remember the other one, but basically it's just like a little, like a door opens and then another door opens and then another door opens, and then you find yourself in a spot of like working in ministry, and it's like,
Is that
how
not your
did I
story?
get here? Like
That's your story,
yeah,
Chloe.
and it's like people are like how do you, like, when did you feel the call? And yes, like God gave me signs. God gave me, it was mostly people. I had 3 people within a week sit me down and be like, I feel like you're called to ministry. And I was
Yeah.
like, what? Where
Wow.
did you, like, it wasn't like God slapped me in the face though, but like it was just like, hey, Morgan was like, hey, you want to come in and the previous kids director come in and like help me wash baby blankets and clean the kids rooms. And I was like, sure.
That's not ministry.
You know,
is
because
it?
after I started serving for a long time and serving in different areas, then I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But then it was like that. I mean, that was I was meeting the needs of people who came
Yeah.
into our church with babies and whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And then I was like, would you want to come in and join one of our meetings? And I was like, okay. And then it kind of just like turned into this thing where I was like interning. Like it was just, you know, it was more like it just happened, and I was walking through things, and through it all, I just like in my heart I was like, I just love like I love getting to do this, because I see every single Sunday the people whose needs are met and attended to because of the small mundane tasks. And it led into like right now I do like what Jessica did, an administrative assistant job, where I don't really like, I don't have a area of ministry that I'm like leading and like whatever and doing these big things, but I get to just do the small, like I answer the phone and I've been able to like pray over people over the phone. You know, having a system for the packages, like that's one of like in my job description that come in. And as like silly as that sounds, but it's like we get things that we do to have, like we're doing mega hunt or like whatever big event that we're doing, like I get to help people organize that, like so many different small things that led to like something I get paid for. But I was just telling you guys, I feel like a lot of like the areas of ministry that I do as well are not stuff that's part of my job description. Like I have a lot of passion for Inspired. I love getting to be on the team and the things I get to do to help out that. I love EXCO, our young adult ministry. Like it's just been, because it changed my life being a part of the young adult ministry here. So it became something I was passionate about, and I do so much that's like, I shouldn't say I do so much, but like I'm involved in a lot that's not part of my job description, and I do after hours or like on my days off. And then even just like getting coffee with people, or like you know, getting meals with people, or having conversations with people, seeing people and encouraging them, like those are things that I love to do, and I felt called to do way before I felt like I was supposed to work at a church. So like my experience is, yes, I get to do great things to support all of the organizational ministry that happens here, and it is my vocation, it's my job. But I also work outside of the church. Like I substitute teach. That's an area where I can do ministry just by being kind to the kids and showing them love, and then even by being a representative of Jesus to others, because like a lot of the teachers at the schools know that I work at the church too, and like they can see my heart and spirit and know that I love the Lord and things like that. Or I'll just do random jobs here and there. So it's like my main area of working doesn't just look like I work at a church 40 hours a week.
Right.
So, and mine was very much like, it was just a slow, like, I just
it's a
did one
very
thing.
slow progression.
And I think that like we all have very different stories. So I think hearing all of us, I think we've all been very connected to the church world, and maybe you're like, I attend church once a month, and like I don't know like what else that's about what I do, or maybe you've never been to church. I don't know what your story looks like, but I think that in terms of Jesus, people who believe in Jesus and who follow him, I think that we are all called to minister to people. And maybe not vocationally, like maybe it's not like devote your life and your job to working for a local church or working for a like a Christian nonprofit, like those types of things. Some people are called to that, and God gives them the gifts and abilities and the anointing to do that. Like,
someone's got to do it.
Yeah. I could never do what Pastor Tim does.
Yeah.
But it is so abundantly clear that the Lord has called him and anointed him and equipped him to do that.
Yeah.
And someone, like, it's a vital role. But I don't think that what we're saying here is, like, if you're hearing this, you need to go and become a pastor.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe this is something that's been on your heart, and you're like, I want to go to seminary, and this is something I want to do. Please feel absolutely like encouraged to do that. But I think that we often glorify the call to vocational ministry, and we forget about the mundane, everyday ministry that every Christ follower is called to.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me, I just wanted to read a verse. There's like they call it the Great Commission. It's talked about a lot, but I don't know if it's something that we walk out a lot. At least me in my life, I'm like, oh, how often do I do this?
Yeah.
But they talk about it in different areas. But basically, after Jesus died and he came back, he calls his disciples. It says, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Yeah. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And just reading that, I'm like, that's our call. Like, once we're following Jesus, it's our call to go and make, like, when we're his disciples, to make disciples out of everyone. Yeah. And I think that looks two different ways, and you guys can speak on this too and what that looks like. But I think number one, attending the needs of someone's spiritual needs. I do think it looks like stepping in first and seeing their physical needs and walking in and walking beside them, showing them love without any strings attached, without being like, hey, I love you, come to church. Yep. Creating a relationship with them. I think too, though, we have to get to the point where we do tell them about Jesus, because we could love someone to death their whole life, but if we never, like, the gospel is a word. It is a word that we're to give them. I think that when the time comes and we have that relational equity, telling them about what Jesus did for them, inviting them to church so that they can hear that, like, whatever the avenue looks like, I think that is like our initial step with people, is to teach them about the gospel, the good news, the message of Christ. But I think it goes even further. To do ministry also looks like making disciples. So disciples weren't just people that were like accepted Jesus and were baptized, but they walked and followed him. So as we're walking in our journey with God, what does it look like to like make disciples as well? And I think that's all ministry that we're called to as Christ followers, whether we do it vocationally, we have a different job, we're a stay-at-home mom, whatever that looks like. Yeah.
I think when we think of ministry, oftentimes we think of it in two different ways. Number one, someone on a street corner with a sign that's like, you need to follow Jesus, and out evangelizing, right? Or we think of someone that works in the church that has a big grandiose job title and description. But I'm not saying either one of those are bad. I think being out and evangelizing is great, and that's for some. And I think having a big title at a church is also for some. But if you don't feel like you're called to either of those, you still have the power and authority to minister to people. Just like that scripture said, because of his power, you are now called to walk that out. And so what does that look like? And I think, you know, oftentimes we could get scared of that call. We could get scared of, what does that mean? We could get scared of rejection. We could be scared of not saying it right or not doing the right thing, right?
That's a very common.
But to be honest, if we're walking fully with God, if we're walking in alignment with him, and we have his Holy Spirit within us, he's going to equip us. And we can remove the pressure. I say this all the time. We don't have to put all the pressure on ourselves to save someone. We don't.
There's actually nothing that we in our power that we can do to save others.
Right. Now, what we do have the power to do is share about the one that can. But by all means, I know for years and years, I've had friends that they just want their people to walk with Jesus. And me too. There are people in my life that I'm like, I want these people to be walking with Jesus. But if we're not careful, we put too much pressure on ourselves that we feel like we're the ones that save them. But to be honest, that's not on us. Right. But we do have a responsibility. And like you said, it's to open our mouths and to share and to do things that do care for them. But we don't have to carry that pressure. We don't have to be the ones that save them. We can't. We literally cannot. So I think that's one thing that I just think through, like, okay, in this season of life right now, for me personally, I'm not called to work at a church. I'm not called to work in a ministry setting. I don't feel called to be out on the streets evangelizing. But that doesn't mean I still don't have power.
Right.
I still have power that comes from the Holy Spirit to encourage people. I think when you were talking, Chloe, I think it's really important that we have people in our lives, friends, family, close loved ones, maybe acquaintances, work, coworkers or whatever. I think it's important we do surround ourselves with people that don't know Jesus so that we can have these ministry moments. Because if the goal is to create more disciples, how am I going to make disciples if I'm surrounded by people that are also trying to make disciples? I don't have anyone. I don't have anyone to disciple, right? And so I think it is important, yes, to have people around us that don't know Jesus. Number one, so we can have relationship with them. But number two, so we can actually show them who Jesus is, right? So the kingdom is not going to grow if we don't have those people in our lives. We're all just one big family, if not. So I just think when you were talking, I was reminded of that. It's really important to surround yourself with people who don't know Jesus, so you then can introduce them to Jesus through the gospel.
I love that. That's so good. What do you feel like, Jessica? Sorry, I'm just like looking over at you.
I can see your wheels turning.
What does it look like for you, or maybe not for you personally, but what do you feel like you would tell people? What does it look like to minister to other people in the day-to-day life?
I think that here's an instance of like when my mouth can say what the right answer is, but I feel like probably the first step in that is not so much doing anything, but sitting with who God is and like what God's calling you to do, because I feel like we've talked a lot about obedience in this episode. That a lot of doing ministry stems from obedience, and we can't know obedience unless we're tuning our ears to who God is. And like there's a story in John 10, like the good shepherd, and it talks about the sheep know their shepherd, and it's really in essence telling us that we are sheep, humans, and the created are sheep of the creator, and we are to know and tune our ears to that voice. So I feel like we can't do ministry every day unless we're at first like at least sitting, not every day, but like taking pockets of time to sit and to ask God what he wants from us. And some of that just might not be, you might be in a place where you're like, I have a good pulse of like who God is. I'm like diving into scriptures, I'm praying, I'm going to church, I'm getting a better idea of who God is. But even if you're listening and you're like, I have no clue. What that can look like is just simple, small, honest prayers to start of like, God, I don't know who I am because I don't know who you are. I think that's the order in which it has to be established is we don't know who we are unless we know who God is. Because if we're created in his image, how can we know what we're created out of? And so I think to even start to do ministry, it comes from an honest ask and question of who is God, who am I? And then what are my next step in obedience? And a lot of that happens in the secret and the quiet places. And I'm going to kick back to social media again. We live in a world that's really noisy, and we can scroll. And I know that like we scroll in silence, but our minds are not silent when we scroll. And what I've had to do in times of my life is to withdraw or take that away, so that I can at least quiet my mind, so that I can hear the small whisper of God. Because often in my life and in my experience, it's not like God like comes across like the sound system of my heart and
Mhm.
says like, here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
It's just like, so it's like a word or a phrase or something so small. That's how we act out of obedience is when we hear him through our prayers, through meditation, listening, silence.
Yeah.
And so like I would just say that stems from that. And then I'm gonna like kind of kick back to like something that a person who discipled me once told me, that she in a time of her life called it. I love that she had a name for it, because it helps me like not necessarily explain it to other people, because I think that it kind of has a weird name, but it does like help me as like a like in my mind, like going back to the main thing. But she called it the ministry of availability. And I think this can go both ways, because the ministry of availability can speak to me sitting before God and being available for whatever he wants me to do, and being sensitive to the Spirit to know which direction, what step. And then it can be flipped on its head to say the ministry of availability for other people. And so being available and having time in order to do that. And I feel like early on, kind of like when I got to that point in my life where I didn't have a paying job, but I still felt a deep call and connection to serve people, is that I remember telling God one time, I would love, like, I will get a job whenever we need it, but I would love for as long as you would allow me to give my time away. I've always wanted to do that. And at this point, I like, that's what I'm doing. And that's so meaningful to me. And it's hard to explain to the world, because like we live in a materialistic world. And so like I can get more, do more, be more if I have more money. But I think that what I've heard God whisper to me is like, give your time away. Ministry of availability, ministry of time. And that goes both ways. There are days that I can sit with God and like do mundane things throughout the house or whatever. And I can be fueled by him. But then there's days where someone says, hey, can you do this? Like, I hate to ask, but can you do this? And I'm like, I can. And that is so, I mean, that is fun. It's really fun. And like I said, it might not always be that way, but right now it is. And so I'm just like, and of course, hear me say that there are times where I'm like, the grass is green on the other side. I wish I had a title. I wish I worked. I wish I had more money to spend. Like, you know, like expenses are getting crazy, inflation, whatever. Like, but I have to be connected, and I'm not going to take a step unless I hear God calling me to. And so it goes back to the still small, like connecting with who God is, knowing him deeper so I can know myself more.
Yeah, that's good.
So good.
I would say a practical for me is, I love what you said, you thought back to something that someone said to you that was discipling you. I think I've learned how to minister to others through really awesome people in my life that have chose to pour into me, that have chose to disciple me, so then that I can go and do that as well. It's a gift. It really is a gift. Yeah, and I think my friend Libby, she is like a powerhouse. She's the one that I was talking about earlier. She's never worked a day in ministry ever. She's served in ministry for sure,
like vocational ministry.
Yeah, she served at churches. She was a part of the women's ministry with me in college, so we spent a lot of time serving together. But I know for a fact that she has helped people establish a relationship with Jesus everywhere she's been, every job she's been at, every organization she's been at. That is like one thing that she's really, really good at. And I have learned what it looks like through her. I have learned tangible, practical things to say to people, ways to treat people through her. And so I think, you know, if you're like, I don't even know where to start, like, okay, I'm going to start by sitting with the Lord and, you know, the still quiet moments. But then where do I go? What do I do? Think about the people that have ministered to you, whether that's someone very closely or whether it's a pastor that you watch or listen to or a podcast that you listen to or whatever. I think for me, it looked like, okay, I'm going to like really start to be a minister in my everyday by taking things that Libby did and then putting them into practice in my own life. And I say
imitators.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly what Paul was telling the church of Thessalonica.
Yep.
He was like, I have heard what kind of people you have been, and you have imitated me and my people. And guess what? I've imitated Christ.
Exactly. If we're supposed to be like Christ in his image, then everything that we do should operate out of that, right? And every single day we should look more and more like him. And so I agree. Let's be imitators of either Jesus. That's the ultimate.
Yeah, that's
right?
where it ends, or that's where it begins, I guess.
Right.
But find people who are imitators of Christ, and learn from them.
Exactly, and whatever that looks like. I know for Libby, she was just telling me the other day that she's like, I have this coworker that you can tell she's eager and she's curious about Jesus, and she's like, I started sharing with her the gospel in the most simple way. And she was like, it really was just a conversation. Like, I was just sharing with her, this is what it says in scripture. And she was like, you could tell that she walked away from that, like, ready to go look at the scripture herself. And I'm like, that's the kind of person that I want to be. Someone that just has a conversation. That's all it is a simple conversation. So find someone. If you don't have someone in mind right now, find someone or get around people that are really good at it, that are really good at ministering to people, and learn from them. It's just that simple.
I love that. That's so good. I feel like walking away, listening to this, and you're like, okay, what does this mean for me? I love Jesus. I follow Jesus. I've had people disciple me in my own life, and I want to do that for other people. I think another thing too is like your discipleship journey doesn't need to end just because you're discipling other people.
For sure.
Like it shouldn't end.
No.
We always have a next step. We always need to be ministered to. We always need to be poured into. So don't like close that off. And I think the higher we go, and I don't mean that in like a level way or being like reaching a certain point, but the higher you go, the deeper you go, the deeper you're able to take other people. So just think about, and I think that's a lot what Jessica said, think about how you can sit and be sensitive to God's spirit and like in acts of obedience, and to grow deeper in knowing him and knowing yourself and walking that journey with yourself. And I think that's going to allow us to see other people and see where we can, step into into their lives and to disciple them and to serve them and to do ministry for other people. I think a big thing we said was attend to the needs of others. Spiritual needs, physical needs, emotional needs, and not to be everything for everyone, but I think through what Hope said, the power that Jesus has given us, because he has all of the power, see those needs in other people and be there for them. And I think just walk beside them. And I think that there's a lot of fear when it comes to like sharing the gospel and to doing ministry, and like that's the first step that everyone has to take, is to hear the gospel and then to accept Jesus. I think just like imitate other people who you see do it well, and just walk out in confidence and know like whether or not someone immediately goes and gives their life to Jesus, you're planting a seed. And ministry, I've learned, is a lot of planted seeds. It's a lot of doing small things that you don't see where they lead, but having faith that God is going to bring them to completion. And it's not all on your shoulders. It's not all up to you. You're not the one who's going to, lead someone, through their whole entire journey. They have to make decisions on their own because we have free will. But I do think that walking away from this, know that if you're following Jesus, then you are called to ministry. And that is something you can start doing today. And whether your ministry is talking to your coworkers, whether it's in this season of life, and it's going to change throughout your life. I've learned that too. Whether it's pouring into your kids and teaching them about Jesus and serving them and meeting their needs, whether it's honestly just pouring into yourself and allowing the Lord to pour into you to prepare you for what's to come if you don't feel like he's calling you to a certain step right now. We're all in different journeys, and they're going to look different throughout seasons of our life. So I hope that you feel encouraged. I hope that you feel like you have a better understanding of what it means to do ministry as a Christian. And it doesn't, like, we all have worked in a church in different ways, but a lot of the ministry I think that we've done has been outside of that. So just know that you don't have to look a certain way, have a certain title, or be anything except be someone who loves Jesus with all your heart and follows him with your life, to do ministry. So I thought it was such a great conversation. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, the Inspired Podcast. Make sure you sign up for the Inspired Conference. Like we said, 1 month from today, It's going to be so good. But we've just had a great time this season, chatting, having some great conversations.
I can't believe it's over.
I know, it's so sad.
But we'll be back.
We'll be back.
Yeah.
So just look forward to that.
Yeah.
We're just so excited to have you. So with that being said,
We'll
this
see
is
you next season.
5 of the Inspired Podcast. We'll see you next season. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Conference on April 27th. If you ever have any questions, you can email us at inspired@thex.church.